Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the National Humanities Center Humanities in Class webinar series. Tonight's session is titled Hip Hop Scholarship. We're joined by A.D. Carson from the University of Virginia. My name is Andy Mink, and I'm the Vice President for Education Programs at the Center. I'm very pleased to see teachers and educators with us tonight from literally all over the country. I appreciate each of you greeting each other and sharing where you're from. If you watch the chat box in the lower part of your GoToTraining control panel, you'll notice that really we're covering the entire geography, and it's affirming actually to see the community that's developing there. As all of us know, our friends and colleagues in Los Angeles are on strike right now, and I'm encouraged to see so many teachers around the country showing their support. As you may have realized after doing many of these sessions, we get a lot of teachers from LA who join us, come out of their classrooms, likely just an hour, half an hour later after the dismissal bell, and they join us for our webinars. And we do want to send our support and send our good feelings to them as they try to rectify their own working environment. I also want to emphasize that the work that we do at the education programs at the center is never a one-man show or done in a silo. So I want to make sure that I acknowledge the attendance tonight from Libby Taylor. All of you know Libby from the emails that you receive and the updates that she gives you. Libby's generally the first point of contact that you have when you reach out to the center with some kind of problem or some kind of interest. I also want to point at Jason King over there in the corner, who is the mastermind behind all of our technology, our web pages, our web design, our webinars, our online services. And I want to share with both of them my appreciation for the work that they allow us to do. And of course, our guest tonight is A.D. Carson. He's an assistant professor of hip hop at the School of Music at the University of Virginia. AD's contact information on Twitter is there at the bottom of the screen, and I have a feeling he will echo this in saying that you're more than welcome to follow him and to reach out to him and to continue the conversation that we're going to have over the next 90 minutes. Conversations like this are, I hope, very inspirational, and I hope that lots of different things get you excited and reveal some innovation that you like to consider with your classroom and your community. And I have a feeling AD would very much like to be a resource for you in all of your classrooms and all of your communities. So be sure to follow him on Twitter and to reach out when the time is right. Tonight's webinar, although you will only hear my voice and AD's voice and music, is really driven by your conversations. So please continue to use the chat box. Don't slow down with your comments or your questions, chatting with each other, chatting with us. My job as the moderator is to bring those questions and those comments into the conversation with AD, and I will do my best to keep track of that. If for some reason a question or a comment rolls out of sight, if it scrolls up out of the chat box, don't hesitate at all to say it again or to nudge me or to wave your hand, and I'll make sure that that's brought to the forefront. National Humanities Center is located in Durham, North Carolina, just down the road from where I am right now in my home in Chapel Hill. And the center is really dedicated to three primary missions. We support an annual fellowship class in which humanities scholars from around the country work with us on an annual basis to advance scholarship and the understanding of the humanities, the ways in which scholarship can help us make sense of our world. Our education programs then try to develop bridges between that scholarly world and the world of the classroom. We do a whole lot of work with K-12 teachers. We do a lot of work with PhD students who will become educators at some level. And we do work with community college and university faculty. The idea, I think, is that the more we know, the better we understand content, the more we understand the nuance of learning and the ways in which the humanities and all the disciplines of the humanities can contribute to that, the better prepared we are to stand with and in front of students of all ages and help them activate the humanities as a tool for the world that they live in. And then we do a lot with advocacy and public outreach. And so, again, trying to make the humanities relevant and articulate to not just people who work in that scholarly world, but really offer the humanities as a way to connect all of our communities. In the education department, we do a lot of work in terms of creating and offering free online resources. I'd encourage you to go to our website and view and review our classroom-ready lessons, our primary source collections and kits, as well as our teacher essays. Each of these resources, again, are free and open, and they're also vetted and contributed to often by scholars in the field to make sure that those instructional materials are updated and reflect the most current and the most accurate understanding of that topic. I'm finding that our webinar series is really one of the best ways to extend that conversation. I'm finding that asking scholars and teachers to be in conversations around complex topics is really one of the more valuable ways to at least open this door and build these bridges. As many of you know, our webinar series is very popular, I'm fortunate to say. Many of our sessions this spring have reached capacity, so there'll be a sold out sign when you go to sign up. But we still have sessions available, and I'd encourage you to go to our website and sign up. We do add some webinars throughout the semester as opportunities reveal themselves. So I would ask you to go ahead and check that out and sign up if you're interested. We do record our sessions, including tonight's, and we post those on our YouTube channel. So after tonight's session, you not only have access to the materials and the readings and the PowerPoint, but you also have a chance to view the recording and go back and sort of linger with it and take some time to be thoughtful about ways to use that in your classroom. We've got other digital assets that we have made available. Again, all really encouraging this conversation between university professional and education professional. That includes a podcast series. Thanks, Jason, again, for helping put this together with us. That includes digital textbooks, all of which reside on iTunes, and you can download and split apart and take segments from and really offer students a glimpse at not just that content, but the process of that discipline. And it does include online courses. We have opened up several online courses early 2019. Session 1 of digital literacy in the classroom has filled, but we do have spaces still available in session 2, which starts on March the 18th. In this course, we offer ways to use the humanities to better critically consume information and data to become more digitally literate. So this is not a tech course. This is a way to analyze and to consider the technical, the data-driven world that we live in. And we've just opened a new section of a new course called Suckers and Swindlers in American History. There's some irony in me sharing this with you now, but of course, as you can imagine, from the mid-18th century on, as this country became what it is, and as we grew as a capitalistic nation, we also grew as a fraudulent nation. And I think what Ed Ballastane, former fellow Ed Ballastane, would say is that you can't have one without the other. And so using primary source materials and archival materials will invite our participants to really explore the history of fraud and scams and schemes in American history. So this session still has spaces available, and it will open on March the 18th. Our Teachers Advisory Council is a big part of us being able to identify and to create the materials that we think are relevant and helpful for you as teachers. I'm happy to point, many of them are with us tonight in tonight's session. Bonnie from Cupertino is with us. I saw Sky check in. I think Carl's here with us somewhere. And I'm almost positive I saw Katie Willett over in Charlotte. These folks are incredibly important voices and connections between our world and the world of the classroom. If any of you would like to be more actively involved with and contribute to our work at the center, we'll be opening the call for applications for next year's council probably in April or so. So please pay attention to that and follow along, and we'll get that information to you. When you finish tonight's session, you will be invited to complete a survey, and when you do that survey, you will receive your certificate of completion. We will certify the hours that you spent with us as well as the pre-readings. And one of the things that Libby has worked hard to do is to try to streamline this process for you. So if you go to our website, underneath the webinars, you can download a form that has all of the spring webinars listed on it, and you can just check it off and either attach the certificates that you print out or find some other way to provide documentation. And so we're hoping that rather than asking you to do this one time each time, that if you plan to attend more than one or a handful or even all of our sessions, you can keep this in one place. So you can download that PDF and begin to fill out that prior approval form. If any of you work with administrations or districts or divisions that have questions about the webinars and the rigor or the purpose and the goals, please get in touch with me or with Libby, and we will make sure that we either work with them to articulate it in a way that makes sense for them, or we will make sure that this form reflects that. So we do want to make this as easy as we can for you to maintain the documentation of the work that you've put in here. So we're really pleased tonight to welcome each of you, all of you, to the session. I do want to make a couple of framing comments before I introduce AD and turn the mic over to him. The first is tonight's session will have a lot of audio content. And so please make sure that your Wi-Fi is strong if you can. Maybe put yourself in a position or move your laptop in a place where you know that you won't have a lot of interruptions. If for some reason we're playing audio for you and it doesn't come through well or clearly, or if it seems to be fading on you, it's almost certainly on your end. You can definitely chat into the box that you can't hear well, and we'll do what we can to troubleshoot with you, but it's probably going to be on your end. So make sure your volume is turned up, make sure your earbuds are plugged in, your AirPods are in your ears, and we will have times tonight where we ask you to engage with that audio content. I also want to say that I don't want you to treat that audio content as some kind of pause from the conversation. I think what you'll find from AD is he introduces his work and he shares the ways in which he uses hip hop to connect content and community, is that the music itself is an expression of that connection. So when you hear a song, when we're talking about a song, it's not meant to be something to sort of drift off and go in the other room and just leave it in the background, but we'd really like you to engage with it. We'd really like you to lean into each song and spend some time reflecting on the points that AD is bringing forward. So make sure that the audio is up, make sure that your windows are open and all your neighbors here, make sure that your kids are nearby. And I think that's going to add quite a bit to the conversation that we ask you to have. So having said all that, I'm going to invite AD Carson to the stage. AD, can you hear me now?
Yep, I can.
Hey, thanks so much for joining us tonight. I've given you the mouse as well, but before I really turn this over to you and ask you to go through your PowerPoint and share with us your material, I'm going to ask you just one framing question to start this, if you don't mind.
Right.
Hip hop scholarship, those are not always terms that you hear together. Tell us how you put those two together, and what, in your view, you feel like that means in terms of using music as an expression for this way that we teach and learn.
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm really glad that you asked the question, because I think that, I don't know that the terms are certainly not contradictory in any way. It may actually be redundant to say hip hop and then follow it with scholarship.
Yeah.
I believe that the nature of the work and the ways that folks are, the way that knowledge is built and produced and engaged with, is kind of built into these cultural products that exist. And so calling it scholarship, I think, is probably helping to make it legible to folks who somehow have always looked at it as being outside of the educational sphere. And I really mean, like, to be in a school building, in a classroom, or to be at a university when I say the educational realm, because certainly in my experience and in the experience of lots of folks that I've spoken to, it's been a matter of folks doing a whole lot of learning in their practice of making these hip hop cultural products.
Absolutely. And as you engaged in this in your own work, your own career, your movement from Clemson to UVA, did you get pushback on that, or is that something that that is increasingly clear and those lines are increasingly blurry?
Well, I think that the lines are blurry. I think that the ways that the pushback comes is also, I think that I say at some point here in this talk as well, that the pushing back is also a pushing forward, and it's kind of necessary. And I think that if there was no resistance, then it would make me take pause, because I would feel like I was doing something incorrectly. If it's not met with a certain kind of resistance, or it's not resisting, then that probably means that I'm not aiming in the right place.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Thank you. So I'm going to turn this over to you, and I've encouraged everyone to turn their volume up, and I'm very much looking forward to hearing how you bring this out for us.
So peace to everybody. I want to thank the organizers of the talk today. So we can kind of talk about hip hop history and literature to understand today's social culture through the example of my dissertation project, as well as some follow-ups. And I don't talk as much about the Sleepwalking 2 project here, but that does exist. But first, I want to start with this video for a bit of context, because I think that it does a better job of making some sense of the work that I'm doing currently.
I'm A.D. Carson, and I'm professor of hip hop, University of Virginia.
It was a weekend of street battles and stark displays of racism.
Honestly, like, what would Thomas Jefferson think about there being a professor of hip hop at his university? That's a real question. I get the feeling he probably wouldn't be that cool with it. I teach a class this semester called Writing Rap, and I'll be teaching a class called The Black Voice, and I'll also be teaching a class called Mixtape Composition. I'm from where the murder rate is disturbing, but no curbing the crime. Time and time again, you find the swine has a purpose, but trying to protect and serve ain't the one you see him doing. Hear the pistol fire, and it's likely them that's shooting.
So, like, if somebody is rapping about what they're rapping about, it's either relevant to them or it's relevant to their audience. So I don't know if that's something.
We have really difficult conversations that are prompted by this type of media. I think it's extremely important that students feel empowered to write about the local circumstances here in Charlottesville. I mean, yeah, like there was violence everywhere. I mean, and it wasn't like an implied violence. It was actual, like actual violence. The marching and the antagonizing and the, and the punching and the hitting. It's just kind of cloudy and it's really loud. And you see people in military gear, but they're not really military. They've got semi-automatic weapons. And you kind of realize that the mist is tear gas. You cough a bit, people are yelling, things are being thrown. And I just kind of thought, this is America right now. This is where I live, but this is the country that we live in. And I'm standing in the midst of the chaos. That's a hell of an introduction to a place where you plan to live, where you plan to make a life. So this place feels like the neighborhood that folks go visit in the movie Get Out.
I want to introduce you to some friends. This is David and Marsha Wincott, Ronald and Celia Jeffries.
People are really polite and seem really nice, but also 2 days before I moved here, there's a huge Klan rally. It's really difficult because I don't know any of these people to separate in my mind the folks who are holding those torches, the folks who show up for the Klan rallies, the folks who are planning the alt-right rally, and the folks who are just like super duper nice. This is an entirely other world. And then this is from Get Out, which is exactly what I told you I was feeling when I moved here. And so of course, if I feel that way, then I'm going to try to sample that and use it in the music that I'm doing. From the 15th of May until this week, I've been working on this. So it's all new. It's 12 tracks, and we're just putting the finishing sonic touches on it. Sometimes people ask, would you trade the fucked up things that happen, or trade not having those things happen, for the art that you create? I think that's a really difficult question to answer. It's always great to have the product of it, but I'd much rather the woman whose life was lost be here than, have some songs about it. This one for the niggas, the one that was called that descriptor when they was delivered out there in Virginia, the ones of the sense who have taken the care to defend the people surrendered from coast to the cold in the whip of the lash. I never lived it, but I tell you now, boy is familiar, say boy is familiar. I think it's really important for us to see each other as human beings. If I wasn't teaching, I don't know if I'd feel as hopeful as I do. Even if it's just a little hope, I've got it because of the students. The future of America, I'd say, when I say me, it's us. When I say me, because when I say me, it's us. When I say you, it's me too, and vice versa. It's not much that needs to be proven in nice verses. Write cursive, scribble out, print it like I meant it. I think that's the future, is us taking what's sort of been fancily given to us as language on the page that they call history, and us deciding to scribble that out and then print very deliberately our story.
So the MC steps into the circle with stories to tell, and for his work to work, it must be dope. He must be dope. And here, dopeness is a response to a question that Avatar Rennell asks about our drugs. It is a special mode of addiction, the structure that is philosophically and metaphysically at the basis of our culture. She prefaces that question by stating, quote, our drugs uncover an implicit structure that was thought to be one technological extension among others, one legal struggle, or one form of cultural aberration, classifiable in the plural, drugs, a singular plural. They were nonetheless expected to take place within a restricted economy. There should be a track right here.
Let's go ahead and I think if we click that, it'll play.
Where
I got involved because friends, you know, seeing the fancy clothes and everything, they come to school with the nice shoes. So, you know, I wanted that.
What I want is for us to address what's clearly a problem. Yes.
We have a very specific gang problem here. It's tied to narcotics, but it's a gang problem.
Right.
Which is different than New York, certainly.
Well, I'm from where the murder rate is disturbing, but no curb in the crime. Time and time again, you find this wine as a purpose we're trying to protect and serve. Ain't the one you see him doing. Get a pistol fire and it's likely them that shoot. Ain't no police in the police, but at least we all know it. And ain't no dreaming in the streets about being a poet. We go with all the public schools where the rules is to show that you know the answers to the test, but unless it's a noble that we filling in, then the feeling is like swimming and drowning. And black is black, we don't distinguish from cinnamon, brown, and mahogany, onyx, and all of it's chronic. So we swallow with tonic and swallowing all of it. See, I find it ironic that this is iconic. It's marketed so you want it, and I sell it with promise. And I can guarantee he's got a bullet and a badge and took a note to protect and to serve to keep a look. And he's scared of me, and I'm aware that he is, but I wonder are you? And they ain't asking you to freeze, but they open and shoot. I know you think he got degrees, but I'm hoping this is you. A nigga with the PhD, still a nigga when blue lights flash, and I'm at prescription, ain't no explaining that. Ain't no amount of philosophy spit negating that. Can't quote a book and then poke you out. If he's got a badge, he believes that he can choke you out. Hands up, stand up, and they shooting you down. So keep your eyes on your mirror when you cruise through your town. I'm from where the boys in blue don't play. Cough up along where I'm from, USA.
And remember, the people that have been violent since August have been the police. We think about the 300 people that have been killed this year alone, like that is violence. There's been property damage here that's been really unfortunate over the past for a day or so here. But remember, there have been many days of peaceful protests here in Baltimore City and in places all around the country.
But at least 15 police officers have been hurt, 200 arrests, 144 vehicle fires. These are statistics. Local police have put out 15 structure fires. There's no excuse for that kind of violence, right?
And there's no excuse for the 7 people that the Baltimore City Police Department has killed in the past year either, right?
We're not making comparisons. Obviously, we don't want anybody hurt, but I just want to hear you say that there should be peaceful protests, not violent protests, in the tradition of Dr. Martin Luther King.
Yeah, there should be peaceful protests, and I don't have to condone it to understand it, right? The pain that people feel is real, and you are making comparison. You are suggesting this idea that broken windows are worse than broken spines. And what we know to be true is that the police are killing people everywhere. They're killing people here. 6 police officers were involved in the killing of Freddie Gray, and we're looking for justice there. And that's real, right? Like the violence that the police have been inflicting on communities of color has been sustained and deep.
But you agree, I assume, with President Obama, who just said a few moments ago, there's no excuse for the violence that erupted yesterday. There's no excuse for the stealing, no excuse for the arson. You agree with the president?
What I agree with is that I advocate people to peacefully protest. I also know that pain manifests in different ways, and I don't have to condone it to understand it. People are grieving and people are mourning. And I would advocate personally for people to do it in ways that you are calling peacefully. But again, I also know that Freddie Gray will never be back, and that those windows will be.
And the president also said, President Obama, he said the violence, he said, distracted from the peaceful protests and distracted from the mourning that the family of Freddie Gray was seeking yesterday. Your reaction to that?
You know, distracted from progress is when city officials get on TV and call black people in pain thugs, right? That's a distraction. So, you know, I think that the unrest, the uprising, whatever you call it, is again a cry for justice here and a cry for justice across the country because the police continue to terrorize people. And again, the terrorizing is actually deadly. Broken windows are not broken spines. People are in pain. So I think that the president, I hope that he understands the conditions that created the unrest and that continue the unrest, not only here in Baltimore, but across the country, because Freddie Gray will never see another day, and neither will Tamir or Ayanna or Mike Brown.
So this is Clemson University on the 14th of April 2016. This is the second day of the psych sit-in during which 5 students, Raynisha White, DJ Smith, Kayla Williams, Ian Anderson, and myself were arrested for occupying this building. It's the university's main administrative building in an attempt to bring back to the attention of the administrators grievances and demands that were issued the previous year. This was almost exactly a year before I defended my dissertation. This was the context in which much of what I'm sharing with you now was written. This is where I completed my doctoral studies and wrote the album that was my dissertation in an attempt to take that noise that came from speaking out about that university's most famous building being named for the racist, admitted murderer, politician, and founding trustee Benjamin Tillman, that land being a former plantation on which students were currently and still are treated unequally, and shape that noise into something, sound, music, a message that would help us collectively work toward a more just reality. If I was at the university doing my work through a lens I was calling hip hop, it would be necessary to speak directly to what was going on outside my door in the community in which I was living in a way that would attempt to connect what was going on there to other people in that community as well as people outside of it.
There's a quick question for you, AD. Amy On asks, did you sign up for it?
Did I sign up for the doctoral degree?
No, Amy, maybe I've misunderstood your question. You can see in the chat box in the lower part of the Go to Training panel, I interpreted that question to mean, how did you get involved with this, with sort of being involved in this before you were arrested?
Yeah. So I'll, I think that I'll work my way back to that.
Okay, no problem.
The sit-in was an escalation. As I said before, there were some grievances that were presented a year previous to the that sit-in. And that was through a lot of it started off with a piece of media that I created, that I made, that's on the album. It was a poem titled "See the Stripes," and it utilized the metaphor of the mascot, the Clemson Tiger, And it also kind of talked about the ways that university, or ways that we might be able to see the mascot of the Clemson Tiger, and utilize that as a way for us to look at the history and the present issues, as well as some of the things that we kind of intentionally overlook. And it was kind of, I won't say dismissed, but definitely misconstrued by folks who weren't willing to see it in the way that I was asking them to see it.
Right.
Particularly, there were folks who believed that I was simply calling the football players at the university slaves, which is not exactly what I was saying. So,
got it. Thank you.
So, the album Owning My Masters is a digital archive of original rap music and poetry. It's a hip hop album that's a critical theoretical reflection on personhood, what Black bodies and Black lives. Rather than theorizing about hip hop, the project attempts to do this work through hip hop. These are arguments for attentiveness to historical and contemporary social justice issues, thoughts about Blackness as it pertains to embodied and disembodied voice and performance through rap lyrics and poetry. The project contains 34 tracks in the primary playlist, as well as 7 additional playlists. There's a video channel, chronological timeline that's annotated with media and bibliographical resources and photo galleries. It's really important that that chronological timeline that has all of that other media there exists there, because it's kind of a way that folks can find the a kind of a more logical, I guess, or a different kind of logic, chronologic way to think about the events that were going on there as the pieces that are on each of these particular mixtapes are written. And so it was written and recorded over the course of 3 years, mostly in Clemson, South Carolina, where I was a doctoral student in that Rhetorics, Communication, and Information Design program. Some of the work was actually recorded in, or at least written in Switzerland while I was at the European Graduate School. And the project reimagines the setting of the prologue and epilogue of Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man as an underground rap cipher into which MCs, artists, scholars, students, teachers, fictional and factual historical characters are invited to consume, create, and consider the world inside and outside of that space. Its contents deal directly with the present moment. We could say today's social culture through hip hop cultural products, while engaging with literature such as Ellison's novel, as well as Baldwin's essays. And the attention we pay to the present and the past provide pathways and possibilities for a better future, or at least that's my hope. This here is the follow-up to that project. The picture here is taken at the dissertation defense. It's titled Sleepwalking Volume 1, a mixtape, and it's closely related to the previous album. In my mind, theoretically and thematically, there's a chronological narrative from the beginning to the end of the previous project that picks up with the first track of this one. I graduated May 11th, 2017. Charlottesville was all over the national news May 13th. And then I arrived in town May 15th. So this album was written and recorded in that time between my arriving and starting to teach the very first day that I was on campus as the professor of hip hop. And so that video piece that I showed you at the beginning, they were here initially to document that, or parts of the creation of that album. And then all of the stuff happened on August 11th and 12th, and they came back to do follow-ups. And so what they intended to do, and then what the piece wound up being, was greatly affected by the events that occurred during the time, or from the time that I moved here to the time that I started teaching.
AD, I wonder if I can ask you a question. That the point you just made, I think might be a pretty important one, which is From your perspective, both as an artist and as an academic, how much of the value of music as an expression is context, is sort of a lens on whatever is going on in our worlds at this moment, either in terms of the timeline or the geography?
Well, I think that those are layers. I think that some of the ways that we engage with the voices that are being presented in the music that we listen to gives us the ability to opt out of really engaging with the ways that context changes. And very often we are conscious on some level of how the context might have shifted, but because it's music, then we can say, well, it's just a song, or I just like the beat, or it doesn't describe my circumstance, or it aptly describes my circumstance, or it describes my circumstance enough that I don't have to worry about any other problematic elements. And I think, not conversely, probably similarly, when we're thinking about ways of using rap, then we find ways to shape it into what we need it to be, and then avoid all of the other things that might be brought up by other people who are in the classroom or other people who might be in the room listening, rather than thinking about that conversation as something, or those issues that people might bring up as ways that we can address multiple people and multiple issues all at the same time. And some of that has to do with the constraints of the classroom. But I think that some of the other issues that come up with that is really trying to, I think that sometimes we're trying to make rap into like a strictly literal thing. It's just a thing. It's just the words, and then we're not thinking about what the music might be doing. We're not thinking about what it signifies, or we're not thinking about why I might sample this strange kind of contentious conversation between an anchor and an activist on CNN. And it makes it much easier to kind of forward through that and say, that's not doing the thing for me that the rap part is doing, so I'm not going to pay attention. And then we miss some of the stuff that might be productive, a productive part of the conversation.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Now that we've taken just a little bit of a pause, I've got a few other questions that have come up. And by the way, I want to encourage all of our participants, as questions or thoughts come to mind, please type them into the chat box and just send them to all. You don't need to send them to me privately. Sean Bodie asks you, AD, would you say that hip hop's aim is to rearrange Ellison's words to make a dominating stand rather than running and dodging the forces of history? Of course, a dominating stand could be interpreted in a whole lot of different ways. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, I think that I could probably agree to that on some level. I mean, it's hard to talk about what hip hop's aim is, but I can talk about what my aim in using hip hop, these cultural products, is. And for me, it is a matter of being able to speak forcefully to what might be seen as dominating forces, or forces that tend to or attempt to dominate, like speaking truth to power, but then doing it in such a way that it is in ways that we might call subversive, or ways that is taking what I understand folks are not going, or certain folks aren't going to listen to. And so there's a way that there's this multi-voicing that might be happening, where I'm saying something about land and legacy, but I'm using a metaphor about the tiger, and using images of the football players running down the hill, and at the top of that hill is the plantation house that's at Clemson. And I'm understanding that that many different folks are going to get many different things from that layering, and I'm hoping that all of those pieces land appropriately.
That's great. There's a bunch of questions coming in. I'm going to ask one or two more, and then I'm going to queue some up. But I do want to offer a question that Bonnie Belshi asks. Bonnie's one of our Teachers Advisory Council members from Northern California. And Bonnie asks, do you believe that your students need an understanding of the history of hip hop for use in the classroom as they're finding their own voice? How important is that historical context?
I believe the historical context is important for all of us, not just for students. I think that one of the ways that teachers opt out is by saying that we don't, and very often we don't really know. So we ask, well, where do we start? Is there like a mixtape that I should be able to use? And hip hop is, like as a commercial genre for real is not very, it's not that old. So you could probably find online fairly easily some like essential records that you need to listen to understand the culture. And people feel very confident whenever they put those together because there are folks who were alive when every one of these records came out. But I don't know that it's so important that we should avoid listening or avoid engaging until we know all of these things. I think that students bring quite a bit into a conversation. I had a student talking to me today, and his assertion was that Kanye West is the greatest hip hop artist in the history of hip hop. That's an interesting first conversation, and there are all kinds of places that that my conversation with that student can go, because that person is definitely invested in what they understand about hip hop right now. And there are ways that I can do some more research to kind of find out what this person means by Kanye being the greatest. But then there are other things that I've had experience with that would lead me to challenge that almost directly and immediately. But that's the opening. So that's where we're going to start. I don't think that we need to go back to, 1522 Sedgwick Avenue in the South Bronx in 1973 in order for that person to be able to have an opinion, because that person's opinion is already there. And it seems that person is also kind of set in that opinion. And so that's the place where, for me, the engagement, the education journey is going to start between me and that student.
Great. Thank you. I'm queuing up the other questions. So why don't you go ahead with advancing your slides, and if anybody in the audience, especially El Hamrick, if you've got some questions, pop them in that box and I'll keep track of them.
So the justification to my committee for the dissertation was that the project was an investigation and some potential responses to a question that was asked by Alexander Wehelier in his book Phonographies, Grooves in Sonic Afro-Modernity. He asks, what happens once the Black voice becomes disembodied, severed from its source, recontextualized and re-embodied and appropriated, or even before this point? Phonographies is the text that led me to Ellison's narrator's underground space. By questioning some engagements with Black voices and then offering mine, I would attempt to do this work.
ADTheGreat.com.
One of my principles is that contradiction is the rule and principle of the universe, and everything in phenomena, whether it's the physical world or the biological world or the social world, has its internal contradiction that gives motion to things, that internal strain. And much of the time that we Homo sapiens don't realize that no matter what sort of conditions we establish, no matter what government we establish at this point, there also will be that internal contradiction that will have to be resolved, and resolved in a rational, just way. And of course, that leads us to what is very vague on how to deal with it. And, many times we claim actions are revolutionary, but really they're not.
They won't rap, not a tap dance minstrel show, so they can't help but wanna follow where my pencil go. I'm like the ghost of Wu-Tang's Bobby Digital's analog catalog trapped inside your stereo. Not mercurial, but open to change. Came during the drought when you was hoping for rain, praying to HOV. I was opening lanes on the right side, solo, joking and playing. It's like Beat Street meets Oscar the Grouch. Traditions that used to exist got argued about and took over. Consumerism hollowed them out. Now everybody scratching heads like, what's the problem about? Yo, if you can't see the boogeyman, what you spooked, and you can tell a lot about a tree from the roots, then it don't really matter what you do to the fruit, cause you ain't eating what you thinking is like venom to you. Ha, I represent niggas that been in the booth, spitting truth, so our peers call us venerable. Ladies get disrespected and then there's a few, so they all baritone like a tenor or two. Ha, but be careful who you mention it to, cause I got sisters, a mother, and living is proof that they're queens, no borough, and itching to prove that I'll put you down under like a didgeridoo. Ha, murder metaphor, red cake matador, niggas kill niggas every day, why battle for a title? Cause if you look like me, you're my rival, but mix it with some ignorance and you can be my idol. I'm about to remix America the Beautiful to the takeover beat, I'm sure it'll be suitable. Write 3 rhymes, solidify me undisputable. Start a revolution, have them play it at my funeral, and print my name on the t-shirts, black solid with prophecies spoken by Socrates, with politics that's paradoxical. On the beach somewhere tropical, sipping daiquiris with Tupac, Scott LaRockino, Obama, solemn, Alaikum is the statement. Peace to the people, pray you never be complacent and never strive for parallel if you were born adjacent. Simple statement, I'm saying always strive for greatness. Yes, 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 yes.
Are you not perhaps afraid of what might happen to you as a result of making these revelations?
Oh, yes. I probably am a dead man already.
No, I don't worry. I tell you, I'm a man who believed that I died 20 years ago. I live like a man who is dead already. I have no fear whatsoever of anybody or anything.
So Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man discovers, quote, a new analytical way of listening to music while under the spell of reefer. If we were listening to Hortense Spillers, maybe we'd say he was, quote, self-critical as a result of his being what she describes as discomfited, unoriented, which she suggests the work of the intellectual should make her reader or hearer. Avatar Rennell might call this a conjuring. She says, quote, intoxication names a method of mental labor that is responsible for making phantoms appear. It was a manner of treating the phantom, either by making it emerge or vanish, end quote. Whatever it is, this, to my mind, is the work of dope. Ellison's narrator states, you're constantly being bumped against by those of poor vision, or again, you often doubt if you really exist. He continues, you wonder whether you aren't simply a phantom in other people's minds, say a figure in a nightmare which the sleeper tries with all his strength to destroy. It's when you feel like this that out of resentment, you begin to bump people back. He later states, I remember that I am invisible and walk softly so as to not awaken the sleeping ones. Sometimes it is best not to awaken them. There are few things in the world as dangerous as sleepwalkers. I learned in time, though, that it is possible to carry on a fight against them without their realizing it. I listened to James Baldwin alongside Ellison's narrator quoting the hymn for the title of his 1964 book, God gave Noah the rainbow sign, no more water, the fire next time. This is the next time. Prepare for fire. The grotesque fantasy of the shrinking so-called majority, America's nightmare, is slowly transitioning from somnolent slumber to a waking state akin to sleepwalking. America, for as long as it has existed, openly endorsed terror and rode the wave of fear that followed to superpower dominance domestically and abroad. To be clear, when I say America, I mean white America. The America America sees, wants to see. Not the real America, but the ideal America. The America that stated all men are created equal while enslaving men and women who legally counted 2/5 less than their American masters. America, the beautiful, who crowns her good with brotherhood, but from sea to shining sea, shoots down and locks up young black boys and girls, men and women, with impunity. This is the next time. Prepare for fire. America's nightmare is America waking up. Good morning, America says. Good morning, America says. Good morning, America says good. Morning, America says you're a true patriot. Don't let America die. Don't let America's death be in vain. Fight for America. This is good morning. The black and brown bruises on the American body must be cut off, must be amputated or risk infection spreading. Sleep, America. This is an age-old procedure, perfected. Or inject local anesthetic, remove bruise, move, repeat procedure, or just sleep. It'll all be over when you wake up. This is the next time. Prepare for fire. This is America burning. This is America learning. This is no nightmare. This is America waking up, realizing its bruises have not been removed, may not be removable, and trying to remove these imperfections or risk infection spreading. This black becoming blacker, this brown becoming more, this body belonging to this mind that has perfected seeing itself as pristine. This is America operating. White America cutting into her native skin, excising what does not belong, what she does not want to see. Cut deeper, cut to the white. It burns, but it's worth burning. Not seeing must be worth the price. This is America screaming. This is America waking up. This is the next time. Prepare for fire. The remains will be black. This is America on the brink of break, ever aware of a two-ness of which there is a constitutional greater and lesser, necessary evils that history won't heal and Hennessy won't help. Darkness and lightness created in the likeness of white God and white Jesus, who would rather see white America burn than see it turn into what it already is, what it always was. America becoming awake, America becoming aware. Is America becoming so scared of what she knows she is capable of doing to herself? Dream sweet, America. Dream deep. Breathe deeper. Now deeper. And sleep. Sleep. You were made from this. You were made for this. You were made by this. You are on fire. This is the next time. America is burning. Ah, that piece is not there.
You know what? We checked this earlier.
It's all good.
Okay.
Yeah, and I can also maybe send a link to it. To speak of specific voices, specific bodies, Baldwin tells us in Stranger in the Village that, quote, people are trapped in history and history is trapped in them, end quote. The bodies of Trayvon Martin, Eric Garner, Michael Brown, Walter Scott, and Sandra Bland, among the countless others, can tell us quite a bit about this trap. If we listen also to Sylvia Winter, who says, quote, the figure of the human is tied to epistemological histories that presently value a genre of the human that reifies Western bourgeois tenets. The human is therefore wrought with physiological and narrative matters that systematically excise the world's most marginalized, end quote. They are of a genre of human that holds less value, that doesn't matter as much as America's preferred genre. To assert that those kinds of lives matter is a matter of perspective, an objective fact to some, counter-logical to others, but nonetheless deeply entangled in physiological and narrative matters. Now, I should state here that that clip that we weren't able to see was a song that is created in a style that we might call trap. And so, as I'm talking about the trap that Baldwin is referring to, I'm also attempting to utilize a particular genre of rap music to attempt to perform that. And you would see that in the video where it's cutting between the present and the past, but that clip's not there. So what then do we do with Trayvon's voice on the 911 call after his body has had its life taken from it? Or with Eric's "I can't breathe" after it's no longer a possibility? Or with Sandra saying, "But I'm still here," forcing us to question its truth? Wahelie's question again: what happens once the Black voice becomes disembodied, severed from its source, recontextualized and re-embodied and appropriated, or even before this point? Is there a use for those bodies, those voices? Frantz Fanon might offer them as, quote, objects in the midst of other objects, end quote, despite our shouts that they be considered people among people. Technological bodies, embodied technology in the service of reification of that master genre of the human here is my argument. Martin, Garner, Brown, Scott, Bland, all malfunctioning. Our cries for justice futile because bad technology, things like these, are destroyed, dismissed with no mortification, often with impunity, because no one should face recrimination for doing what must be done to maintain the order of things. Cynthia Marie Graham Hurd, Susie Jackson, Ethel Lee Lance, DePayne Middleton Doctor, Clementa C. Pinckney, Tywanza Sanders, Daniel Simmons, Sharonda Coleman Singleton, Myra Thompson, the Emmanuel Nine. Their bodies were instruments used to turn the page on an ugly chapter of American history. Common narratives attempt to convince us they should be commended for their sacrifice in helping us remove the Confederate flag from the South Carolina State House grounds. Michael Brown and Eric Garner, however, were already broken, disobeying orders, and therefore undeserving of the respect or dignity afforded proper people by authorities. Their bodies, laying on a sidewalk in Staten Island or the street in Ferguson, are no different than broken televisions or stereo equipment put out on the curb for eventual disposal. And we can easily add to this list countless other names like Philando Castile, Alton Sterling, Stephon Clark, the Cynthia Clements, and Saheed Vassell. It's as if you don't see them. They often doubt if they really exist. Winter says, quote, our mythoi, our origin satires are therefore always formulaically patterned so as to co-function with the endogenous neurochemical behavior regulatory system of our human brains. Humans are then a biomutationally evolved hybrid species, storytellers who now storytellingly invent themselves as being purely biological. With this particular presently biocentric macro origin stories are overrepresented as the singular narrative through which the stakes of human freedom are articulated and marked, end quote. The history in which we are trapped is a genre of storytelling that perpetuates the genres of the human and our values thereof. We keep telling ourselves who we are with these stories, and we keep being what we've said we were. What we are now are products of our storytelling, trapped in the trap we've written. Currently, objects don't write their own histories. And since I too am an object in the midst of other objects, perhaps this genre of writing is something that can be done with the disembodied voice, severed from its source, recontextualized and re-embodied and appropriated. Perhaps this can be the kind of dope that makes the phantom emerge or vanish, that provides a new, self-critical, analytical way of listening.
Yes, yes. I'm just saying, you know, maybe your heroes and my heroes are different people. They said equal, but they was only people. From any spot you see hypocrisy like this is see-through. They wanted you to be cool, but not the same for me too. For them to be the ones, then there had to be some people to be too equal, but they was only people. From any spot you see hypocrisy like this is see-through. They wanted you to be cool, but not the same for me too. For them to be the ones, then there had to be two. You won't never see me standing for no pledge, singing no national anthem. I'm not a patriot, I'm descended from that, and I'm carrying in a chariot with the lariat, pistol on my waist, heavy as a burden. Carry it, the metaphor I settle for is better for opponents of my mind state. So when I rhyme state, they condone it. I make no bones about the why. Wish a nigga would, since they wish a nigga dead before they wish a nigga good. But they wishy-washy, window watching, picket, hawking cowards who don't get the plot, but switch the topic minutes after hours, talking killing profits while there's killer cops and all the powers that be with all control over how it should be and how it is. So I'm here to let a motherfucker know. No, that ain't the way it's about to go. I'm a descendant of either Huey or Malcolm or Robert Williams. I feel them while even knowing that out. They said equal, but they was only people. From any spot you see hypocrisy like this is see-through. They wanted you to be cool, but not the same for me too. For them to be the ones, then there had to be some people to be too equal, but they was only people. From any spot you see hypocrisy like this is see-through. They wanted you to be cool, but not the same for me too. For them to be the ones, then there had to be two.
So I've said this before, that my mother told me, since you can't be quiet, at least be careful. And I carried that in my mind the entire time that I was down there in South Carolina, and I brought it here to Virginia with me. And for a long time, I interpreted that as advice about my personal safety more than about my words. I thought that she was saying that since I'm going to say what's on my mind, I should be vigilant about watching my surroundings when I say whatever it is that I'm thinking. And I guess I think a lot. I've thought a lot about that sentence, and I think that maybe there's more to it. Something not as much about taking care to watch my surroundings, but about taking care in choosing what I say and where. Less about silence than strategy. So I always have something to say, I'm pretty sure of that. But perhaps she was telling me to take care into choosing the when and the what. And this.
Maybe metaphors are easier because they ask us to think of something unrelated to what we really want to talk about, to actually talk about it. That's something I love about language, but I'm hesitant because there's nothing like what I want to talk about sufficient to make those who don't care. And those who do are constantly bombarded with new ways and encouraged to say it so it doesn't sound so much like it is, so it doesn't appear disrespectful or angry or militant. Even the truths we hold to be self-evident search for synonyms and metaphors across time for ways we can make them better understood. All things being equal, if we spoke of fruit picked, plucked too soon from where it grew, to litter the land upon which its life force sits, has roots deep and thick,
its very strength a threat in itself, begging warnings, perhaps hopes for tall, thin branches. We could understand how strange it might be to watch it lying there, this fruit, and how all of nature might be appalled, not that it was taken, but that it was wasted. If we could imagine ourselves somehow equipped to do something about this type of waste, not only for want not of it, but also for the sake of ripe, old fruit and flowers that fall according to nature's course, and not taken for the sake of some justification that amounts to because it was there and because I could. If we could imagine ourselves so equipped, perhaps rather than it being noteworthy or newsworthy, the new words we sing are to the same old song, which sounds a lot like the one before it, and the chorus comes in on cue with some variation of "you are doing this to you." It's not the song we follow along and beat our drums to, but we stop right then in that moment to say, today has to be different for tomorrow to be better. And perhaps we stop asking politely for people to stop picking and plucking and pillaging and plundering and killing and wondering why people are pissed off. And maybe metaphors are no easier because some fruit grows where it's less likely to fall like this, where it's more likely to see maturity, where it won't have to worry about bruising and browning on the ground while its pickers stand around watching the spectacle. So it's difficult to see oneself in such silly figurative speech. If I was better with metaphors, I'd try to explain to the people who insist all fruit is the same how these particular cases are strange, and how it's ultimately vain to proclaim all fruit matters if these few don't. But I can't imagine myself better equipped with an apt metaphor than we are with solutions to this current issue, other than continuing to speak of fruit picked, plucked too soon from where it grew, to litter the land upon which its life force sits, has roots deep and thick, its very strength a threat in itself, begging warnings, perhaps hopes for tall, thin branches, so we can understand how strange it is to watch it lying there, this fruit, and how all of nature should be appalled, not that it was taken, but that it was wasted, and maybe that it takes us talking about fruit to even begin talking about us.
Yeah. So well, I appreciate your attention. That's the last piece, the last slide, and I'm happy to look at some of these questions. I think it's also maybe important to point out that I'm really interested in attempting to perform the argument, like rather than to just try to make it directly, because I think that that's also an important way to demonstrate the ways that we might listen to some of the music that already exists that is not framed in some of these terms with some of these thinkers. And so my attempt is to really to provide my work and some of this other context as a way to see some of the other things that we're doing, because I can answer direct questions about the work that I make, and I might not be able to answer those kinds of questions about other people's work.
Thanks, AD. I've got a couple of questions for you, and I know that there's some questions that have been asked, and I'll bring those forward. I invite all of our participants tonight to go ahead and make comment and share their thoughts, and we've got some time to weave those in. But one question I want to ask you, AD, is, each of the songs that you played had multiple pieces that are constructed. There's the sampling, there's the music, there's the lyrics. If we were watching you live, I'm I'm assuming that there would be you as an expression. You would be an embodied voice rather than a disembodied on this webinar.
Yes.
You've also made some pretty clear choices in terms of the images that are behind each slide. And I noticed in some of your performance pictures, particularly early on, you did use photography and to add that extra layer. Tell us just a little bit about the ways that you used all of those mediums to create these messages.
Yeah, and I think that it should be also noted that as the screen that we're looking at now, there's a layer there that's missing. That's supposed to look like stained paper, and so that's also very deliberate in the design. So in some of the screens you see it, but then in others it's not there. So in the maybe metaphors you see the staining there, but yeah, I think that it is really important, especially if I'm performing this argument. I can't perform all 34 tracks, which means that folks don't get that whole chronological narrative. So what I'm doing is pulling one story out. Today, I'm talking to you about this thing that happened exactly or almost exactly a year before before I defended the dissertation, because I think that that's emblematic of the way that the dissertation's work was received, as opposed to what the dissertation means as a symbol. And so you can have an institution that's totally enamored with the attention that a project like this might bring, but is not interested at all in addressing any of the issues that the project is speaking to. And so what I'm trying to do is illustrate that there are multiple layers to any of these things. And again, attempting to try to connect with people on whichever level it might connect. And then the hope is that people will go back, and there, I believe, is something pleasurable about going back and listening again or watching again or engaging again to see, to experience whatever it is that you might have missed. This picture here, which is also on the first slide, is a picture that I took on the day after the shooting at the Emmanuel AME Church. I was sitting around at Clemson reading, and then I heard that happened, and a friend of mine called me and said, I think that we probably should go out there. I don't know what we can do, but sometimes it's just important to be around if folks need folks. And we went and we got a cheap hotel room, and then we went and we just had conversations with folks who were out there, and we stayed for a few days to just try to be to be support or to be community or whatever it may be. And there was an outpouring of support from, all over the world. I think that we probably saw it on television, but to be there were also lots of people who came there who, and so for me, I think it's important to also represent that. There was a march that happened that I was a part of. There's a picture from that march that's there. And then some of those pictures are historical pictures of incidents that happened before I was born. And I'm just thinking about this concept of looking back and looking forward, and the ways that the music is attempting to layer all of those, to put all of these things in the conversation together. And so if you listen to the piece called Internal Contradiction, it starts off with Huey Newton, who is having a conversation with I can't remember the television show that he was on at that point, but it's Huey Newton is the person who's in the beginning. The music is sampled from the film Django Unchained, and then at the end it's two different interviews with Malcolm X. And so it's like I'm able to have an interaction with all of those pieces of media within the span of 4 minutes. And so I think that I'm trying to perform that same thing with the layering of the text, as well as the pictures and other things that I'm trying to represent there on the screen.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm going to use that question to pivot a little bit to that question that came up earlier from Joshua Sensabaugh, who asks, he made a very similar observation, which is that it sounds like word choice and context and instrumental selection are all equally important in choosing to create a piece. And he's wondering if you have any suggestions on how to work with younger students to frame that concept, that there are these pieces that are assembled in a certain way, and each of those pieces have great value in the overall and final product.
Yeah, I mean that's a great question. I think that we are probably accustomed to learning all of them at the same time.
Right.
And sometimes we're just overloaded. We're bombarded with a whole lot of things. It took me a really, really long time to realize that the ABC song was Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. And then it made sense, to use this familiar thing so that I could learn this unfamiliar thing. And they are so separate in my mind that when I'm singing Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, I'm not even realizing that I'm doing the ABC song. So, oh yeah, that is William F. Buckley. But yeah, so is who Newton was talking to. So but that so that layering, I think, is already happening. And again, in my experience, I found that students are aware of it. And sometimes maybe it's just taking pieces of it apart. So the students who are aware of Django Unchained, for instance, they hear that track and they automatically are like, oh, that's that one scene from that one movie. And so they already have that, and it conjures that. For other folks, they might need to be told, and then maybe they go and they watch that media, and then they see it, like they engage with that film, and then maybe they ask the question, well, why is this being used as the musical backdrop for that piece that is titled Internal Contradiction?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you. Some other questions that have come up. Amelia Simpson asks, or as I read her question, she says, she can't wait, first of all, to share these pieces with her students. She's teaching American literature, and the conversations we're having are very important. There are conversations that are important for us to have. She notices that you make so many references and allusions to other thinkers and artists, and she'd love to know, who do you suggest to your students when they ask you what they should read or listen to? What is on that, that list of things that you use to inspire your college students, which might actually be appropriate for younger?
Yeah, I taught American literature to high school students, and I would always, I would still suggest, there was a lot of James Baldwin that students would really enjoyed, especially when we got to have conversations around them. When I was down in South Carolina, I taught a group of high school students, and we read Citizen by Claudia Rankine and The Fire Next Time. We had some conversations also about Between the World and Me, because a lot of people were reading Between the World and Me at that time. And so I suggested that for them after they were finished with the class that I was teaching. Also, a lot of Nikki Giovanni. Students were really enamored with Nikki Giovanni and Gwendolyn Brooks. Yeah, I used to keep an updated reading list that I would give, especially to high school students who wanted, or high school students, and very often undergraduates would ask for a reading list, particularly fiction, but sometimes they would want nonfiction, or they would want nonfiction stuff as well. And so I would try to send that list out, because there's so many really dope texts that we don't really, that aren't required. And I understand the pressures in a high school classroom to get done with what, might be what we need to do, or what we have to do, or what we're asked to do. And so then we don't have time for the other things that we might want to teach. But I've also found the autobiography of Malcolm X was really impactful for me. I think that I was led to the autobiography of Malcolm X through hearing a rapper talk about it in an interview. And when I read the autobiography of Malcolm X, then that led to me reading a whole lot of different texts, like The Spook Who Sat by the Door.
Mm-hmm. First of all, your credibility just went through the roof when you mentioned that you've taught high school. So nice move to slide that in. Let's see. Here's a question from, by the way, Amelia, appreciate your answer, but if you have that list anywhere and you can send it to Libby, we'll distribute it to our teachers. I'm sure they'd find it fascinating.
Oh, well, yeah, oh, for sure. I can do that.
So talk a little bit, I'm going to paraphrase Brennan Ivy's question, talk a little bit about the role of race in hip hop. In particular, Brennan is intrigued by the way that suburbia in white America is attracted to hip hop, especially when they don't have that same inner city experience. So talk to us a little bit about the implications and the influence and the reflection of race, and I mean that in both senses.
You know, I think that it's a conversation that probably like we should foreground in our, you know, education. If we are the educators and then we're saying we're going to like engage in, you know, like a thing that we are calling hip hop, or we're going to consume hip hop as this educational tool. I think that it's logical for us to be having conversations about the racial implications and such. And so we should be rooting ourselves in literature that does get at that. And so this is the reason that I mentioned that particular piece by Spillers that I added to the additional materials, because I think that she's talking about implications of you know, like the ways that Black studies comes into a university. But I think that there's a lot that we could probably gain from her talking about what's going on, or what was going on at universities from, you know, the late 60s to 1994. And I think that if we're reading what she's talking about in this sort of institutionalization, the folks who are really paying attention to what hip hop, or where hip hop scholarship is going, or what people are calling hip hop scholarship, then you'll see all kinds of parallels between those. So I don't know it's really difficult to get very specific. I know that I talk to my students about their personal relationships to language, and then that gets us into conversations about race, particularly about the ways that people feel certain ownership or allowances with certain words. And I think that that's important, because some of the stuff that happens whenever I'm asking students to produce work that might be raps is that they are looking at the expectations of the genre, or what they believe are the expectations of the genre. And then whenever they are imitating that, which I believe is probably what we would ask someone to do if they are writing other types of work. If they imitate what they hear in rap, then that performance, even if they aren't intending for it to be, may very well be a racial or racialized performance.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's really important for me to have that conversation about language and what it is that we're doing. And then the conversation about like something like, you know, like what we're calling, like what we call authenticity might come up when in that conversation about how we feel about particular words, or how those words, or our relationships, our personal relationships to those words. And I think that it helps in the space that students are engaging with one another to hear about people's relationships to words, because then it affects the way that we might engage in language in that particular space. We might want to be more deliberate about what we say around people who have particular relationships, you know, like tenuous relationships to certain words. And that is assuming a lot, but and I think that that's one of many ways that people might do it. There's also just like an incredible amount of work that really, like folks who are talking about all of these implications, who are talking about the percentage of you know, suburban white kids who are purchasing rap music. And I think that those are also really important conversations that we need to be having, and what that means, and what does it mean then for a particular genre of music to be important, and for someone to say that that is an authentic, you know, a quote unquote authentic performance of Blackness, if the people who are authenticating it have never even had that experience.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's a really important question that we should be asking.
One of the things that's really struck me about our entire conversation tonight is the power of, and the emphasis on, language, words, word choice, and text. One of our attendees tonight, Noel Hamrick, writes that she and Katie Willett have been teaching in African American studies, and they're inspired by how this presentation really really emphasizes that use of text to connect to history and current events. And it's powerful to realize the value of and the power of those words as they're chosen and as they're used. So that's something I think immediately anchors this in a very different kind of way. A couple other questions. We have just a few more minutes left. A couple other questions I'd like to pass on to you. Let's see. I'm not sure if you're going to consider this a fair question or not, but we're going to put you on the spot. My friend Mike Williams over in Warren County, North Carolina asks, was there a singular hip hop track or album that ignited your passion and or caused you to fall in love with hip hop? And like, what was that moment in your own experience with music that really it became that moment of clarity for you?
Well, I have 5 brothers and 2 sisters. There was a moment at which one of my younger brothers had decided that he wanted to rap, and then one of my older brothers decided that he wanted to rap. And I think that if you grow up in a house with particularly a lot of kids who are competitive, then what one of the siblings does, then the others want to do it better. And so I was really enamored with poetry very early on. And when I heard and saw what my brothers were doing and what they were listening to, I don't know if I was so tuned into that, then I was really tuned into competing with them. And I thought that I had some tools that would make me better at doing that than they were. And so we were really competing with each other, trying to battle each other. And, we started off thinking we were gangster rappers. And so we were really writing songs about one another, about how we would murder each other, really saying that we would kill each other. But really imitating the music that we'd heard or that older people in our family was listening to. And so I was influenced by all of the music that was playing, but certainly there were some albums that became really important to me after the fact, but I don't know, it would be unfair to name one because I don't know if there was one that had so much impact that made me think that, yes, I want to do this. But I can say that growing up, living in Illinois and growing up in central Illinois, growing up in the Midwest, it was probably more Chicago and Memphis and southern and Midwest rappers much more than it was, and maybe more West Coast rappers than it was the East Coast rappers that many people name whenever they talk about the foundations of hip hop. And so there is this very regional thing that kind of makes conversations awkward when people talk about pioneers, because while those pioneers are certainly, they certainly are impactful and they have certainly contributed greatly, I'd be lying to say that, those are the people that, me and my siblings or my older cousins or my aunties were listening to, because they weren't.
Excellent, thank you. You introduced in that opening clip that you shared, one of the very first things that you noted in this Huffington Post video was how surprised or shocked or even discouraged someone like Thomas Jefferson might feel if he realized there was a professor of hip hop at the University of Virginia. Mm-hmm. Are there other universities, other college campuses that you're aware of that similarly embrace scholars in this field? I know there's somebody at University of Texas in Austin. Where are your colleagues? Where are your peers in this work right now?
I have a friend who's out at the University of Iowa by the name of Brandon Alexander Williams. He's a really dope MC. There's some, there's the fellowship at Harvard, and then there folks at Columbia. There are all kinds of people who are really interested in hip hop. I think that, and there are all kinds of people who are doing really incredible work, and they just, no one, they don't have the title of professor of hip hop. And so, you really kind of have to be in tune with what folks are doing to know that it is, this engaged hip hop work. And so with Brandon's work, I know that Brandon is an MC. Like we've shared stages before, and we've collaborated, and that like that's a different thing. So I think that it's a matter of with a little bit of time, there will be more people, but I don't see myself as separate from the world of folks who aren't at universities, who are making music and who are really doing this same kind of work, who are working with high school students in the classroom and in after school programs. I don't see what's going on here at UVA as separate from that. My comment about the way that Jefferson would feel is because of Jefferson's comments on, endowments of the mind and body. And so I really do believe that, I think that Jefferson has said what he felt about particular folks and, their intellectual abilities. But I am encouraged, and whether it's at universities or not, it's not like folks are going to stop, that's going to stop hip hop. That's not even a thing that's on my radar. And I think it would be silly for me to even insinuate that. So I feel like I have a multitude of colleagues that I know and that I don't know, because there's always music being made and there's always, dope shit being done.
AD, that's a fantastic place to end. There's always music being made. We very much appreciate you sharing your work with us tonight. I hope we find other ways to work with you at the National Humanities Center, and I'm going to encourage all of the teachers to reach out to you either through social media or through email, and maybe follow up with some of the conversations that you've just begun tonight. Thanks again, AD.
Word, and I thank you all for being here. So I had a great time. Peace.
So I want to thank all of you for joining us tonight. Please follow the National Humanities Center on social media. Our Facebook page, our Twitter feed, and our YouTube channel are all great ways to see the upcoming events. I will mention, in terms of other webinars this semester that maybe have a little bit of connection with tonight's session. On January the 29th, we're working with Bill Carbone from the Rock and Roll Forever Foundation on a session titled Rock, Pop, and Hip Hop Are Humanities. And then a little later in the semester, we'll be working with Annette Gordon-Reed from Harvard University on recovering lives at Jefferson's Monticello. So both of these might find ways to connect with some of the themes and some of the topics that we've discussed tonight. Tonight's session has been recorded, and Libby tends to get it up on the YouTube channel within about 48 hours. You also, again, will be able to download your evaluation and print your certificate once I close the Go to Training room. So I'll probably wait just a moment or two after we say goodnight, and then I'll close the room, and you'll receive that prompt. Our next webinar is scheduled for January the 24th. That's next week. We'll be working with Liz Skilton from University of Louisiana at Lafayette. The title of the session is Defining Disaster: How Rhetoric Shapes Our Understanding in Response to Hazards. I look forward to seeing you either at that session or a future session of the National Humanities Center webinar, Humanities in Class webinar series. Good night, everyone. Have a great day at school tomorrow. Good night.